G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. A family business is a great way to build intergenerational wealth, but by nature they're a bloody tricky beast. We've all heard the horror stories of families that have built successful intergenerational businesses only to deteriorate into squabbles and eventually total breakdown. Not only is all that wealth squandered, but future generations' opportunities are lost and family relationships are permanently damaged. It's rarely due to a one-off event. More often it's owing to a series of cascading incidents over the very long term, but quite often it's also over the generations. No family business is immune, and I noticed over my career that two of the major contributors are poor communication and the lack of effective planning. Now, there are many success stories out there, and what we often forget is that those families face the exact same issues that all family businesses face. The difference being that they confronted the problems head on and managed to resolve the issues, and that's why they are where they are today. One of those problems is how to integrate and involve the next generation successfully in the family business. I've had many conversations, mostly with mums and in farming families, who've got multiple children who want to come back to the farm or the business and be involved. I mean, I had a discussion only a few weeks ago with a mum whose daughter's just leaving school and desperately wants to be involved in the business, just like her brothers. Both parents wholly support the idea, but they know it's tricky having multiple kids involved, especially if it isn't handled properly. Now, as I told the mum, there's more than one way to skin the cat, and this is the main reason I wanted to chat to our guest today about her unique experience. And that leads me to our guest, Sarah Becker. Sarah's one of the young, smart and driven success stories. She's well known and actively involved in the rural community. She's a mum to an energetic young boy. She's a chartered accountant, a trusted advisor to many successful rural families, and she's a significant part of the family grazing business and also accounting practice based in central Queensland. If you're involved in a family business or have kids that have come back or want to come back and join the family business, you need to hear what Sarah has to say today. On that note, we better get cracking with Sarah. Righto, for everyone listening, Sarah, can you give us a high-level overview of the family business and where you are right now?
Okay, so multiple businesses within the family. So I'll start off with let's call it the sweet spot. So my sister and I, as of July 2020, took over what was James Becker & Co., which is a rural chartered accountancy firm, and it's now rebranded to Becker & Co., Queensland. So Alexandra and I suppose, sit within our boutique chartered accountancy firm in Rockhampton, beef capital of Australia. Pretty proud about that one, Ben. But the other side of the family group that everyone's connected to in some way, in shape and form, is Jarrah Cattle Company. So it's an operation that sits out in the Dawson Valley, so in central Queensland, my father's home area, and I suppose there's a reason for that. But we have an aggregation of rural properties out there, and we specialise in different breeds. We've got Herefords, Jarrah Reds that we've created on our own accord, and Redfords. I'll leave the breeding stuff to my very talented brother Sam. And then we have a commercial and backgrounding operation out there as well. So it all fits in together, but essentially, as a family, we have a love of the land and a love of agriculture and agribusiness. And
there's your brother and three sisters, isn't it? All involved in the grazing business, I suppose you'd say.
Exactly. In one shape and form, we're all part of family business. I think the saying goes, we break every rule by being all in business together. And as a side note, whilst we're all in business together, my siblings are actually my three best friends as well. Because to me, having Christmas lunch with your family is the most important objective out of anything in this whole entire world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That makes perfect sense. And you've got a really unique business in the sense that everyone is actively involved, those on the farm and those off the farm, and everyone has different, how should we say, technical or practical experience to be able to add to the business, don't they?
Yeah, correct. I think probably, if I speak from my perspective, in the sense that I think everyone probably assumed that I became a chartered accountant because my father was a chartered accountant. It actually wasn't because of him, but I actually had a grade 8 business principles teacher called Mr. Wu, who, I don't know, that subject just really meshed with me, and that's where my passion, I suppose, for accounting comes from. But I suppose throw that in the mix of the agricultural side of thing, that's where I suppose, to me, if you can combine a talent with your passion, you've got a pretty good outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah, and accounting is one of those degrees. Like I did an economics or an agricultural economics degree at uni, and I've had a lot of parents come along and say my kids are going to go in and do business or commerce or agricultural economics or something like that at uni. And my comment always is if you wanting to go and do a degree at uni that's going to be really practical anywhere for whatever world you want to go into, whether you want to travel the world, whether you want to come back onto the farm, whether you want to work, in Perth, accounting is one of those real good quality base degrees that'll give you a skill that you can use pretty much in anywhere and be employed anywhere, isn't it?
Exactly right. And I don't think it would actually make no difference if we were talking about, in our situation, a beef cattle farming operation or a bakery. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's a skill set that people have, but converting that skill set into a sustainable, long-lasting business, unfortunately, there's some things that you need to know in order to survive and thrive in today's business world, I think.
Well, the old analogy, it's no longer good enough just to be a good quality farmer or a good quality business owner. Practically, you've actually got to have a really strong understanding of the accounting and the financial side, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. And I suppose, and you're the same here in that sense, Ben, I feel very lucky that I'm able to combine, let's call it the numbers side of it all, but it's the application of that. And I think that's where I feel very fortunate that I love agriculture and I love agribusiness, and I can combine those two together. And I think from my perspective, let's just say, look, 2 years ago, Queensland and New South Wales was sitting in one of the worst droughts in history. What your clients are going through is what you're going through as well. And you're making business decisions at that point in time that not only impact you on the land, but impacts your business then in the accounting sense as well. And I think it's that understanding of not just knowing what a textbook says or what a legislation says, but actually, let's call it rolling your sleeves up and getting your hands dirty and understanding it. I think it's probably underestimated as a trait to succeed in business these days.
And I think also the communication. It's okay to know all the technical side. Point. It's all good to know the practical side, but if you can't communicate it to the people that are on the ground, you're in a whole lot of strife, aren't you? Because you can give all the advice as an accountant or a professional advisor, but if people don't understand it and don't implement it, it's not useless, but it's substantially less value to them, isn't it?
I think that's a really good point, Ben. I think as professionals these days, we can tell everyone what not to do when it comes to risk mitigation and what have you. But at the end of the day, I think it's knowing your clients, because at the end of the day, business is about strategy and achieving that through mitigating risk in order to achieve your objectives and outcomes. And I think today as professionals, we're too big to say what can't happen. There's risk in everything that you do, like stepping out, outside the door is a huge risk at this point in time. But I think it's being able to go, right, we need to form a pragmatic solution that achieves what a client is wanting to do, making them aware or trying to reduce those risks, but making sure that it's not just a piece of paper that tells you what you can't do, but more so is a plan of attack to tell them what they can do. And I think that's where, as professionals, we've got to be careful in the direction that we're going, that we're actually not putting ourselves out of a job by the risk that is involved in everyday business these days.
Absolutely. So I suppose there's two sides to this question. Again, I'm really intrigued. There's I want to come back to the family business and work in the family business, and then there's I want to stay in the family business. I get the feeling there's probably 2 points. So did you come straight, for lack of example, out of school or university back into the family business, or did you go elsewhere? And what made you do that?
So I'll talk about my experience, and I'm actually going to talk about Alexandra's and Sam's experience as well in that sense. So my experience was, so born and bred in Rockhampton in central Queensland, was educated down in Brisbane for high school and university, and I'd become a pretty good city slicker of a kid, Ben. I loved my lifestyle in Brisbane.
Lots of lattes.
Yeah, vanilla lattes, I think it was back then, was my love. So when I finished my university degree, I actually had a choice to move down to Sydney. I actually got offered a job with one of the big 4 accounting firms down in Sydney. And at the same time, I was I'd been home for a little bit and what have you. And then, to be honest, I'd never thought about coming home to Rockhampton and going into the accountancy firm. But I actually decided to come back to Rocky over Sydney because I actually thought that was more out of my comfort zone at that point in time. I think Sydney was just a further entrench or a further step of ease, if you want to call it. I'm not saying that living in a capital city is necessarily easy, but that's where my comfort was at that point in time. So I thought I'd move to Rocky, and I thought I was only going to be home for a couple of years. I honestly thought that that's all it was. And Mum and Dad, it was never forced upon us to come back. It was like we were set free. And I think it's quite bizarre that we've actually all chosen to come home in some format. But yeah, I came home thinking I was only coming home for a couple of years, and that was 18 years ago, Ben. and you will not get this girl out of Central Queensland now. And my husband had to learn that the hard way. But in saying that,
happy wife, happy life.
Yeah. So as I said, I am a big advocate and a big supporter of living in rural and regional Australia. Every day of the week we'll strongly go into bat for that. From a different perspective, and I was actually talking to Alexandra about this podcast in the last couple of days, and she did commerce law, and to be honest, she's a much more capable jillaroo than what I am and what I ever will be. So she has multi different skill sets that I don't have, but she did commerce law thinking that she would pursue the law, but at the last minute she decided to actually pursue accounting. So again, she was down in Brisbane and doing the good old Big Four side of things, and she just found there was no passion, there was no energy, there was nothing that she was really striving for. And my sister's greatest strength is her team ability and her passion for her family. So I think, say, Sam has a passion for genetics, I have a passion for accounting, Alexandra has a passion for family and just being that team player. So she again decided to come home in the accountancy firm, and I can't answer for her whether she thought it was short-term or long-term, but she is amazing in what she strives and achieves each day. And then my brother Sam, so he was doing the university thing down in Brisbane, and I think got the award for the best feeder steer or feeder bull, I should probably say, in his first year at uni with the amount of weight he put on. And he went back for the second year, and he must have been driving down and said, what am I doing? Like, I'm just wasting everyone's time, energy and money, and turned around and came home. If I'm being really honest, I think he regrets not doing a trade, but I think as a skill set, I think, again, agriculture underestimates that. To me, it's more than a trade, it's more than a degree. Like, what people on the land manage and deal with each day, their skill set needs to be more recognised, that's for sure. So, and then Fran my other sister has pursued law, and her family are based down in Brisbane, but also have connections out at Roma with her husband's family as well. So how she pivots between all three of those, Brisbane, Roma, here, again, is quite remarkable in that sense as well. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think that was me going off on a bit of a tangent there.
No, that was perfect. That was absolutely what I wanted to hear. So everyone's got a different sort of journey, but they've all come back with the common tie, which is family and being involved. So your dad must have been fairly persuasive, would you say, in being able to wrangle three daughters into the mix?
So Dad's motto was always to give us girls an education, because no one can ever take that away from us. And I think that's something maybe in agriculture they could learn a little bit in that sense, because land, cattle, cropping, that can be there one day and gone the next. But I think in his mind, if his daughters were well educated, it was up to them what their future held for them in that sense. Maybe he regrets that to a certain extent with the strong and maybe feisty daughters that he now has. But he often says that his biggest and best investment was the education that he made in all of us. But it was us three girls that went on, I suppose, to finish our tertiary and then, post-grad study post all of that as well, kind of thing. So I think Mum and Dad, I think the fact that they didn't pursue us to come home, I think meant that we've come home on our own accord, and therefore all bring different traits and different skill sets, what I was just mentioning before. But I think it's the common theme of family and putting each other first and wanting to better the other team member that probably has enabled, do you call it the longevity?
Or sustainability?
Of it all. And the reality is, as I said, Alexandra and I have taken over the accountancy firm. I can't believe it'll be 2 years in July. It feels like only yesterday in that sense. So that was, transition number one. But some other stuff will be, happening in the next couple of years as well. And I don't think in his mind he ever thought we'd probably all come home, but I think he probably underestimates the joy of his passion that's maybe come through to all of us, and because it wasn't forced upon us and we've carved our own way. And I know we do things that it's not his way or my way or whatever way when you're a family or a team, and it's no different. When I use the word family, I believe the word family is different to business, but our common theme is family, and that I think enables the business to continue. And if I'm being honest, I think at the moment we're probably living and finishing off some of his dreams. I think the next challenge for the next generation is to form and be clear as to what our dreams are, because I think sometimes where it gets lost in agriculture, and I think it's an amazing thing, the legacy item, but I think there comes a point where you have to be respectful of the older generation, but at the end of the day, you have to have the reason, the why, as to continue on in that sense. And if you don't, then it will stay together because you have that legacy item. But I think when you've got multiple family members involved in it all, I think you have to be very clear on that why moving forward.
And also compromise. That seems to be the big thing.
Yep.
I mean, I've always said to people is once your children get married and have their own family, then the most important thing in their world is their little nucleus family, no longer, with mum and dad. And that's just normal human nature. And it's being able to understand that that's the case where they're coming from, finding out what their why is or what they want from the future, and then being able to say, okay, well, how do we all work together so we can all achieve what we want to achieve? And I think that's where you see the old 2 generations to build it and 1 to lose it, is that sort of get lost over time. So I just want to ask you an interesting question, which you may not be expecting, but did your parents make you work hard when you came home on university holidays and school holidays?
Slave labour. But honestly, I think it was one of the best traits or, best things that they ever did in that sense. So yes, school holidays, I remember at the time, your Brisbane friends are all going on the, back then when you can travel to Europe and ski holidays to Japan and Canada and Disneyland. And we were up in the back cattle yards, probably, fighting amongst ourselves, figuring out who's got what role or who's got what job. But that's where I think the bush is such an amazing, not just asset, I don't mean in a physical sense, but the asset that it creates for a family in that sense from a mindset. We actually were joking about it because we're actually working through for the next generation, I suppose, our strategy, our objectives, our shareholders, our why. And one thing that Dad always used to say was quick, quick, quick. So when you're in a cattle yards, like yes, there's time for quiet times and what have you, but everything was with a purpose. And I think therefore this saying quick, 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 and we're actually going to incorporate it as part of the mantra, if you want to call it, for the group, is that quick, quick, quick. You get in, you get stuff done, and then you move on. And yes, there's the enjoying times and everything. But yeah, and you would have been the same, Ben, as in, now as a parent too, all I want to do is to spend time out on the properties when we can to get my son and, hopefully more children down the track exposed to that. And I'm not going to call it a lifestyle, but that way. And I think it's hard to explain it when you haven't experienced it. But you and I are looking at each other with little smiles on our face right now because we know exactly what those values and what those traits are that, at the time we hated it, but right now has probably helped make who we are today, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. And I mean, my dad used to make me go digging fence posts when I got back from uni for the first couple of days just to harden up my hands again and sweat out the beer and fish and chips.
Yeah,
and all
I was going to say sweat out the
things.
alcohol. Yep. I remember coming home one time and having to roll up fences, and it was punishment because I think I'd partied too hard, and my parents were letting me know that wasn't okay.
I think so, and it's one of those things that it gives you a great reset. And I had the same thing. I had mates that used to just go home and go on holidays and relax for the whole time. And Christmas, I'd work 12-hour days on a cotton farm just down the road to earn enough money to put myself back through uni the next year, and all my mates were having a great old time, and I was working 7 days a week, 12-hour days, and only time I got off was when it rained. So I got that, and it's an interesting. Why I want to raise it is one of the things I see out there is there's two ends of the extreme. There's the families that have businesses that go out and their kids go away to school, to say boarding school if they live remotely, or to university, and then when they come back they go, I don't get to spend much time with Sarah or Ben, and therefore I don't want to make their time at home hard work. I want them to enjoy their time with us, so I make it really easy for them, and they don't actually learn the value of hard work and planning and difficulty. And then the other end of the scale is they bring them back and they work them to the bone. And I think both ends can have problems, but I see more and more problems down the end of making it too easy for kids when they come back. They go off to uni and have a great time, come home and just laze around the house and do nothing. That's actually really counterproductive. And it's the old saying, I suppose you'd say, of the unintended consequences of making it too easy. So I'm with you. I think my greatest fear for my daughter Sophie is that she'll have it too easy, and therefore it will dull her spirit or dull her drive to be able to achieve things, because that drive can be transferred into anything you do. It can be the drive to have a better relationship, better health, better business, better adventure, better family, etc. And I think it's really important, and the rural community seems to do that far better than most others.
I agree. We want to, protect our children and give them the best of everything, but sometimes the best of it is actually, learning to, get on a horse and muster and, you got to do the tail before you can get in and, do all the adventurous riding and everything like that. But yeah, the bush underestimates. And something I was pondering even leading up to this podcast is I actually think as an industry, they're very good at whinging sometimes and not realizing what they actually have in front of them. And I think the divide between city and country is getting worse and is actually only going to get more extreme. But I think the bush has this amazing story to be told, and it's those life lessons, it's those traits, it's those values, it's the ethics that I think society could actually learn a lot from today. And I think we're the lucky ones that know this. Maybe it's the hidden secret kind of thing. And I think, as you were saying with Sophie and, for William, that's sometimes the best lessons that we can actually give them. And yeah, it's not working to them to the bone, but none of us I think resent our parents or feel like we've been hardly done by those 12-hour days and, as you said, sweating out the alcohol or doing all those other chores. That because I think the biggest thing is that passion and drive, but also responsibility. I think even in society today, people underestimate we are all responsible for our own lives. And, whilst I know I even referred to myself earlier on as the lucky one or what have you, and I know you would consider yourself the same, Ben, I think it's because of the responsibility that we take for our own lives. And I think a lot of that comes from our connection and what the bush has taught us.
Well, it's taught us to be responsible and have contribution. So I always talk with Sophie about her family contribution, what her responsibilities are, and it's so much different to her jobs, and that's the way we try and cache it, so she understands that you're part of the family. Absolutely, we love you dearly, but you have a certain level of contribution you have to make. And I remember when I was a kid, it was always you weren't that valuable until you could open gates, and then you became the little gate opener, and then you actually and I can remember as a kid being so excited when I could finally ride big enough to ride the motorbike and go and check water troughs, or I could open gates and stuff like that, because then I was personally responsible for something in the family, and there's some real value in that. So the interesting part in your scenario is a lot of times family businesses, and especially the farming world, is they think they have to come back and be a farmer. So I have to be back on farm driving the tractors, I have to be mustering the cattle. But there's more than one way of skinning the cat, isn't there? And yours is a prime example where you've accumulated a highly valuable skill for the family business, and then honed that skill, and then been able to bring it back into the business to be able to grow it. And I think that's an important point that a lot of families forget, is outside skills brought back to the business can be actually better than just having the skills on farm or in the business.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Ben. I think even if we look at the traditional farming family model in that sense, I think actually having too many people with the same skill set doesn't enable businesses or family businesses to continue or to grow in its current format, which sometimes is not a bad thing. It just is what it is in that sense. But I suppose from our family's perspective, there was an accounting firm, and there was, the rural properties in that sense. So coming back, as I said, I, got to be, I suppose, unofficially the CFO of, Jarrah Cattle Company, and then also get to be a chartered accountant, within what is now Becker and Co. And I'll focus on Sam, my brother, and I, because we were the first ones to come home in similar times. I think he came home a couple of years just after me. But I don't try and do what he does, and he doesn't try and do what I do.
He has 3 sisters. He's probably too scared, I'm guessing.
True. Although put him in a room with his sisters, and he can take us all on pretty well in that sense, Fred. But I think where sometimes people, and I'm going to unpack that in, and I'll try and remember my way of thinking here, is that saying too many chiefs and not enough Indians kind of thing. So I think you have to be careful of that in a family situation. And we're talking about the same generation, not multiple generations in that sense. So that's a whole different conversation on its own accord as well. But when I say I don't know what he does or what have you, and he doesn't know what I do, I think where sometimes businesses fall wayside is that it's like, right, one person does this one, or let's call it, the bookwork, and one person is out in the paddock, and therefore I don't need to know what the other one's doing. So I don't want to say that it's in that sense, but what I'm saying is essentially my figures are a reflection of what's going on in the paddock. So we were able to probably form, do you call it a nexus? To know that, okay, I'm not going to be out there mustering or doing all of those items, but I know what you're doing, and I know, you're either working to a budget or we've got actuals that we're, committing to and those kind of things. So they have to read together, and he has to understand what's going on in the figures, because at the end of the day, a business is guided by its cash flow to a certain extent, and cash flow for a beef cattle farming operation is based around the cattle. So, and majority of our stock is breeding. So, he needs to communicate to me, what are the pregnancy rates? What are the weaning rates? How many breeders do we have? Like, you can't just pull those figures. Like, I could make a pretty spreadsheet, but if the figures have no relevance to the paddocks, and the paddocks vice versa have no relevance to the figures, well, you're really not working together. It's two parallel items that actually have no value whatsoever in that sense. So I think that's where, and I keep going back to this word team, and we use that in the accountancy firm too. It's not like employees, employers, that kind of thing. The way I see it is everyone is part of a team. And when I say that, it's almost like a circle. Everyone has to work together to ensure that, you're working on the same objective and learning from the same things. And I think where we all worked really closely together, even more so, like it's easier in the good times, but during that drought, money was going out like there was no tomorrow. And, without diving into the figures of it all, we know what that drought cost us. And you can't do something in the let's call it in the office and set and forget. Things changed almost daily during those types of things. And it was Sam and I communicating with each other and knowing what is and what wasn't that enabled the business to get through that. And we actually made a decision as to what strategy we were going to do. And then we had to stick to that and work our way through that. And I think at the end of the day, it was the right decision and the right strategy, but that was ultimately his call. But we worked together, not just him and I, but worked together to progress on that. But going back to your question, is there value for different team members? Definitely. But you can't work in isolation together. You have to work I emphasize that word team in that sense, because team members can contribute in all different ways. But if you're not aligned on what that team is, then there is no business at the end of the day.
Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode. So every family has ups and downs. Like no family's ever going to have just, rainbows and unicorns. You can tell I've got a 5-year-old daughter. Rainbows and unicorns all the time and happiness. What do you see in the new world, I suppose you'd see in business, that families, what are the big major mistakes, I suppose you'd say, or the most common mistakes you see families make when they're trying to bring the next generation through and grow the business? What's your observations?
Communication. So we have a saying in our family, we don't agree a lot of the time together. Yeah,
what's the point in having each other? If everyone agrees all the time, there's no point having the four of you, is there?
So that word communication and compromise becomes a massive part of it. And also we have this saying, if you're going to say something, say it to my face. I think sometimes people jump at shadows or, he said, she said, behind the scenes or what have you. When that starts happening and communication breaks down, everyone I call it goes to their corners, goes to their separate corners, and you're not therefore playing in that common ground, in that common space together. And as you said a little bit earlier, most of the time everyone then has their own families. So, of course, everyone's then going to go home and start saying, I start saying to my husband, oh, Sam did this or Sam did that or what have you. So, yeah, we have a pretty strong saying in our family that if you can't say it to my face, don't say it at all.
Yep.
And the other one is timing. Pick your timing. If you're in the cattle yards and it's a bit of a stressful moment and suddenly, you're not talking about cattle, you're talking about something that happened 6 months ago, it's probably not going to go down overly well. So I think having that forum, which when you think about it, if we isolate that word family and that word business, a business has meetings on a regular basis, quarterly catch-ups or half-yearly planning sessions or annual reviews and all those kinds of things. It's being able to go, right, this isn't the time, but let's, what meetings and it doesn't have to be, when I say meetings, the reality is in agriculture, it's sitting around the kitchen table, but saying, right, I think it's distinguishing that this is a business conversation rather than a family conversation. And I think they're very hard to distinguish. And by default, they will merge across both, and that's okay. But it's having that timing, communication, that forum for everyone to be able to say what they want to say. Because I think if you can't say it, it is just going to build up and you're going to burst, right? Like as in some format. So and to answer that question, so I think communication and timing is really important and running something like a business. I think the other thing that I mentioned a bit earlier is your why. You don't all have to have necessarily the same why, but you have to have some alignment and some commitment as to what you're making together. It may only be that you intend to stay together for the next 5 or 10 years because the end goal is that everyone goes their own separate ways. And I think we see split ups as a bad thing, but it's not always the case kind of thing. The reality is some partnerships run their course and their time.
Well, strategic.
Exactly right in that sense, which is no different to any business non-farming wise as well. So, and that comes back to that communication piece of being pretty transparent and open with that. And then I think the other thing that then erodes if we keep going down the chain of when things start really going wrong is then trust. If you don't have trust, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a family business, a farm, you and I even talking now, Ben, if we're going to exploit this in somewhere where I didn't know it was, if you lose trust with someone, there is no relationship and there is actually no way forward kind of thing. And it's actually then when you get to that point, you then need to call it and you need to, work your way through it kind of thing as best as you can.
Trust then would be tied back to a strong why. Would that be correct in the sense that if you all agree to the why is to do this and this is our plan and you're all working towards the one plan, it's a lot harder to break trust. Or sorry, not harder. One of the reasons trust seems to break down is when people operate with their own agenda. So in other words, I have a different agenda to you, so therefore I'm manipulating the situation to get what I want, whether that could be narcissistically or just inadvertently. And so if you've got a really strong why and a plan to work towards, well then you've got less chance of losing trust, would you suggest?
I agree. And that's a really, really valid point, because you got to remember back to that point, everyone is going to have self-motivation within your why. Like, when we're talking about compromise, I know what my brother's end goal is. I know what my, sister's end goals are. And we all don't have the same end goals, which is totally fine. But there is enough common elements there to bring it all back in.
But you can tie all those whys into the business why, can't you? Into
a bigger piece of, let's call it the pie. And I keep going back to this circle. You're going to probably have to edit out my hand gestures and all of this, Ben. But that kind of becomes your why. And so if people haven't communicated their individual why or their compromised why to form part of the big pool, well, there is no group why, there's just individual whys. And if that's not communicated, well, then there is no trust. And I could, if I pick on my brother Sam, for example, I know his end goals is his genetics, and he is talented and has every right for that to be his end game with what he's doing with the cattle. But if he started suddenly, he was buying bulls on his own accord or running cattle on his own accord that we didn't know about on the properties or what have you, well, that's a breakdown of trust and communication and probably a lot of other, bad things. But if that was to start happening, there is no common why anymore because everyone's self-motivation, it's broken down.
It becomes all everyone each for their own, doesn't it?
Exactly. But I think you're naive if you think in a family business that there isn't self-motivation involved in it, but it's everyone being clear and transparent and communicating that because then no one has anything to hide in that sense. So there is that trust and there is that communication. And so it enables you to move forward together in whatever compromised or each little tangent part of that pie.
And it's interesting, there's what reasons people can be unclear about their why is they just don't know what it is. They don't really have a clear and they haven't thought through it. And in the vast majority of families, they've not had significant education, been exposed to all the things that you've been exposed to, and they might need help. They might need someone to come in and help facilitate, and there's professionals out there that do that. But then there's also the situation where people don't want to say what their why is because they might offend dad or mum or brothers and sisters. And so the typical one I see is you'll see mum and dad come along and they've had the farming business, grandfather and grandmother started the business, and now the son or daughter comes along and says, well, look, I don't really want to be a wheat farmer, or I don't want to be a cattle farmer, I want to be a cotton farmer, or I might even just want to go and start an engineering business, whatever it might be, and they don't feel they can be totally honest with their why. And what happens over time is that builds resentment. However, even if you're doing it for the right reasons, you don't want to upset mum or dad, etc., it builds resentment in you, and then over time, it's that naivety that it breaks down and it's never going to work long term. And I think knowing what you want to get out of this, both short and long term, is really, really important. And then when you're operating as a family or in a partnership, is to be able to go, I want to work, Sarah, for example, to make sure you achieve your why as well as much as you want me to achieve my why if we're in business. I think that's a really important frame of looking at it. And if you've got someone on the other side that's not trying to work towards your why as much as you're trying to work towards theirs, you're going to end up with resentment and breakdown and a loss of trust as well.
Yep. And I think I've known what I wanted to do. Going back to my Mr. Woo back in grade 8, I knew what I wanted to do. So life has been, when you know what path you want to take, I've never had to go on that journey I've definitely discovered who I am along that way, if you know what I mean. The 20-year-old me versus the 30, 40-year-old me is looking a bit different and should teach younger Sarah a few more things, I think. But that saying life is easy when you know what you're doing or what you're working towards. And I think it's one of those things though too, Ben, I say that, but then I don't think you should spend your life pondering too much if you don't know, I think it's important to know your why. So maybe that's a little bit contradictory, but your why may just be something, it doesn't have to be huge or magnificent or
grandiose.
Yeah, exactly. Those simple wins along the way, take those little wins because those little wins build up to, can build up to significant things. And I think in agri, we focus on sometimes the dollar value or the outputs of that. It may be totally non-financial as to what your why is or what your outcome longer term purpose is. And that is totally okay. And even touching on it, and probably don't want to dive too much into it, I think as a female sometimes, if you want to be a career mum, be the career mum. If you want to be the stay-at-home mum, be the stay-at-home mum in that sense. I think we are all too quick to judge what is and what isn't. And, even within family businesses, call it for what it is and what you would like to do in that sense. And it makes it easier for everyone in that sense because you're not trying to guess or try and figure it out. But yeah, and I know there's probably two different things that I'm saying. Know your why, but in the same sense, don't get lost in your journey of life by trying to figure out your why, because your why is probably right there in front of you without you even realising it.
Yep, and sometimes why can just be as simple as I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. And if I look at my dad, my mum and dad are complete polar opposites. My mum watches the money and the cash flow and all those sorts of things, and she wants to see the grandkids and spend time. My dad's why is just he wants to go out every day and see his cattle. He's just said, my hope for my life is I just go out, play with my cattle, because he's got a Herefords as well, and that's how we obviously got to meet each other and years ago. And he just said, one day I hope I just fall off my horse and that's it. He said that's the end of it. He said that's all I want to do. I don't want to retire to the coast. I don't want to shoot the lights out. I just want to do that every day. And that's a strong why for him. And when the drought hit down in New South Wales a couple of years ago, and it was horrendous, all he wanted to do, his whole why for the whole time was I just have to keep my core breeding herd. because it's taken me 50 years to get it to where it is. I don't want to lose it. And that's all he did. He spent the whole time making sure he retained it. So I think that's a really good point. I think a couple of things I'd like to chuck in there, Sarah, if that's okay, is be honest, but not brutally honest. And I think that sort of ties in with the timing. A lot of people think that honesty has to be brutal, but it doesn't. You can be kind and honest.
Kind. I was going to say the word kind.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And the ability to be humble, I think that's another one, is to recognise that everyone has their own skills. We don't know everything. I think that's really important. And I think the other one that I looked at really, really closely in this is doing an apprenticeship, is so realising that, it is going to take years to get the right level of experience to be valuable. And everyone has to come back and add value if you want to be involved in the business. I think that's really important, is even if you're not an accountant or you're not a genetics person or you're not a lawyer or you're not a banker, like you could just come back and say, look, I'm just one of the hardest workers on the property, or, you've got to find a skill. So I would think that the next generation that's looking to come back to the farm is find out how you uniquely can add value to the family business in your area of expertise.
Yep. And I think that starts by having a solid, your nuts and bolts foundation, off farm, take it to any business. You don't come in as a CEO.
No.
You come in as, that entry level and work your way up kind of thing. And that's hard work, commitment, dedication, all the communication, all these things that we've spoken about. So to me, the bush gives you this amazing, do you want to call it toolkit? It's unpacking that and applying it on an everyday basis. And I think the next generation coming through has traits that the older generation doesn't have. And I think it's the learning from both sides of that. Like, I think if respect is both ways, as you said, kind, humble. Another thing my husband often says is delayed gratification. You can't have everything here and now.
No.
And life would be no fun if that was the case. Like, in all honesty, we'd all have children and have these amazing lifestyles when we were in our 70s, right? When you've done, your career, gone through it all and what have you, and then boom, that's when you probably should have, and if you've been with someone like the financial bloke, have, your nest egg there ready to go and what have you. So life is messy, you know what I mean? And that's the exciting part of it all. And it's using all these, different sayings and these different words that we're talking about. But I think at the end of the day, it's the journey, not the destination. Like, as in, and I go back to that saying, quick, doing. Like, sometimes just doing, like, don't overthink things sometimes. And that's coming from me. It's a very detailed person. And Alexandra, I'll open up a conversation with her. Actually, it was 2 mornings ago, and she's like, oh my goodness, where has your head been? Bring it back out here, kind of thing. But, it's living reality. And you know what? Life really isn't that bad, and it's actually quite exciting when you think about it.
Well, it's the way you view it. It's the way you view the situation. So
True.
I know what we talked about this originally when we talked about the topic. I remember when I was, say, 22, 23, I went off to university, and once I finished uni, I got this unbelievable education because I knew absolutely everything, which was just amazing. And then within 10 years, I realised that I knew nothing, which is, I think, part of the journey. And I think there is a real value in, in harnessing the young person's energy and enthusiasm from the older generation, and then the younger generation accepting the fact that, the older generation might know something. But you said something really funny to me at the time, was you mentioned about you had to essentially learn under your dad, not only the technical side, but the practical side. And you talked about, making cups of tea, you even had the point, wasn't it? You'd like to just touch on that, because I think that's really important, because when kids come back to the family business, and it's harder with mum and dad, maybe they've got to sweep the floors, maybe they've got to mow the lawn. It's not all glamorous, is it?
True. So I remember coming home, and dad, face-to-face meetings was a big thing, say 10, 20 years ago. Not that it's not now, but obviously in different formats. I still remember that, dad had called me in to make him a cup of coffee, and I think some tea or something for the clients that he had with him, or maybe it was other staff members, I can't remember. Anyway, I made him a cup of coffee, brought it back in. He's like, no, that's not the cup I have my cup of coffee in. I was like, okay. I walked back out and essentially got his cup, and then just tipped the coffee into his cup. Walked back in, he had a sip, and he's like, no, that's not how I have my cup of coffee. So I had to go back out. And then I can't remember whether I went in one more time or not, but I remember he had at the time an amazing office manager, and I remember going down to her pretty much almost in tears going, can you please help me make this cup of coffee, because I don't know how to do it. Anyway, it was, I suppose, do you call it tough love? But it was probably setting the tone that whilst he was my father and I am his daughter in the office, he was my boss essentially, or I was learning from him. And I think I passed that test because I think that the daughter in me would have said, Dad, will you just go do it yourself?
Yeah, don't be a lazy old bugger, get it done yourself. You can make your own.
Or, I wouldn't have thrown the hot cup of coffee on his face, but if it was a cold glass of water, it maybe was a different thing. But it was me biting my tongue and having to go, sure, let me go figure that out or what have you. And at the time, I thought it was, I still remember going home that night because when I initially moved back to Rocky, I was actually living with Mum and Dad. And I remember kind of going home and thinking that Mum would side with me, and she didn't at all. And it took me time to realize what that lesson was. And here I am joking about it now, but it wasn't a bad thing in that sense. And I think it was, I still remember it that time on, and I had some amazing mentors and teachers in the firm here that are no longer here anymore. And even if I'm being really honest, I was actually bullied initially by one obviously team member that's no longer here and hasn't been here for a considerable period of time. But this one person really wanted to make sure that I wasn't treated any different. And I don't know what game she thought she was playing or what have you, but I never thought I would be bullied in my father's accountancy firm, but I actually was. And look, it's one of those things, it's a life lesson, and I learned a lot from it. Probably what it made me also do, and I'm not saying that it wasn't here previously, but your team and your culture and all those kinds of things. I think a huge part of what the firm that was and that Alexandra and I are continuing to create is that overall, your team and your culture is so important, so important, and then applying that to the cattle operation as well.
And you also mentioned it, which I again thought was really important, was the cup of tea was just an anecdote, I suppose you'd say, an example
totally.
of a theme. And I remember you saying that it took many years for clients to actually trust you, and as you went through the apprenticeship, because they'd ring up and they'd say, hey Sarah, what's the answer to this, can you go and ask your dad? And the reality was, your dad didn't even know the answer, you knew the answer. And you knew that you had to you tell the story because it's much better, but that was a really important transition for you as well, and that was part of that, being humble enough to be able to learn the lessons.
Humble and respect from that older, and the when you've got any transition, and this is an accountancy firm, but it's actually no different to any business in that sense. So again, gung-ho Sarah, 20-year-old or 25-year-old Sarah thought that, she knew everything or what have you. And I was very lucky that that's the joy of being in, I suppose, a smaller firm, is the client interaction that I've had from a young age within my career. But you would have every call with them. And to be honest, I didn't know the answer to most of the stuff, but you would go, okay, I'll work through that or whatever and get back to you. And exactly right. Every closing conversation was, and if you could just double check that with your father, please.
And that wasn't 22-year-old Sarah. That was for many years, wasn't it? When you were highly skilled.
It then took time. And I still even remember we're a firm that very much so in that April to June time does like business planning with our clients. And I still remember whilst Jim was fairly remote, well, if we're being really honest, my father doesn't know how to turn on a computer. So he has survived a whole accounting career with never turning on a computer. And I don't think there's many people that can say that or will ever say that.
I know one other, and he was exceptional accountant.
So meetings with this where it was, spreadsheets and things laid out and year-to-date figures and planning and what have you. And I remember sitting in on those meetings, and the meeting wasn't about me at all, even though I'd done all the hard yards to get to that. It was, whether it was Dad or whoever the other senior manager, whatever it was making them look good in that meeting. Because as far as the client was concerned, you are a firm, you are a team, and they don't want you in there bickering amongst each other, or I told you that, or you didn't know that, or what have you. So I still remember that, and it was only 5 minutes or whatever that, you'd go up to the boardroom and you'd sit down with Dad. I'll pick on Dad if it was someone else, but I'll just say Dad, and go through everything. And essentially it was one of the best learning tools that I've got of being able to debrief to someone what they need to know rather than every single line. It was getting straight to that high level outcome. And then even in the meeting, if Jim said something wrong or wasn't, 100% right, redirecting it or what have you with it all. And at the time, I was probably so frustrated that it wasn't me leading those meetings. I'm now the one leading those meetings. But again, it's that apprenticeship. And what I learned from that process, even at the time, though, I had no idea what I was learning. And actually, maybe I need to actually ask Dad, did he know that was the lesson that he was teaching me at the time. He probably did. I've never actually outright asked him, so to speak. But all those things, that is who I am today because of those skill sets. And I wouldn't have got that if I had have jumped straight to the top or thought I was right up there. It's those humble, as you said, those humble things, doing the apprenticeship, taking your time through it all. Because it's one thing to know something, but to have to explain it to someone else, that is an underestimated trait in any profession and in any team situation or any professional situation.
Yeah, it's funny. That was what I spent my whole career doing, Sarah. I used to say I was never the best financial advisor in the world, but I was probably the best communicator. So I could actually take the really complex stuff, dig through it all, understand it all, and then translate it into what people needed to know, and so they could understand it and then implement it. And that's what I spent my whole career learning. And I think that's, with any professional advisor you have, I said that's their most valuable skill, is you want them to know they're technically right, but they have to be able to explain it to you and practically apply it. So that apprenticeship's really important. And I think if I look at a lot of businesses, and again, going back into the rural space, is kids don't get the apprenticeship they used to get years ago, or in a lot of cases, whereas I see the successful families, they do. And I'm going to not mention a family's name for obvious reasons, but I do have some friends that they've got a couple of kids off at boarding school. They've had to send them away. And I remember one of the, not last holidays, the ones before, I spoke to them and they said, yep, the 16-year-old girl and the 14-year-old boy, they're out on dozers working together, clearing country and stuff like that, to learn to work together and whilst their friends are traveling around having a great time. So I think bringing your kids right from an early stage to understand not only the practical application, how to work hard, but also the nuts and bolts of the business, and not leaving it until they're 35, 40 before introducing them to the financial side of business. Do you see that happen in the successful families, that there is that long-term apprenticeship, not only when they're actually physically in the business, but well and truly prior?
Definitely. So I think, in any business, you've got operational management and then exec management and ownership kind of thing. And I think unless you go through those processes, you can be an owner. It's almost easy to be an owner these days, but to be successful and sustainable, even though I don't really love that word, but sustainable, then there's a fair bit to go through. In our office here, we are most fortunate that we have, 4 generations of some, we'll call one client group, and there'll be 4 generations within that. They're definitely in that time, let's call it, when they're doing the outdoor apprenticeship. We don't see them all that much, but just recently, in particular over the last 12 months, there's been a fair bit happening within the ag scene, a fair few transactions or a few due diligence. You go down a few dry gullies to get to, to the one you want to end up on. And the family groups that we see that, you have faith and trust in that next generation coming through, they are here in these meetings with, here in our office. They're the ones having the conversations with the banks as well. Yeah, they're sitting back. They're not the ones leading the way or have necessarily done the figures or the work through, but they are aware of what's going on. And, and some of the transactions that we're talking about at the moment, it's that generation that will be paying back and also be able to reap the reward from the assets that are being acquired. But I think, Jim actually said in the client group that we have here, the successful family groups have taken that next generation on the journey with them. So I think in any situation, you can choose to walk in front, and you do to a certain extent. Then they have to walk beside you. And then probably the next step is that next generation then walks in front. So if you try and do it reverse, I actually don't know how it would work in that sense. But again, and if we go back to, it's often seen as someone does the figures, someone's outside. If you can't align that and you don't have to do it, but you have to be aware of it and know what's going on. I just can't see how you can succeed moving forward in today's modern business times.
Yeah, because I think it was my second podcast, I was talking with David McLean. He was talking about that most people think off of farming, the husbands generally think that there's a rattlesnake hiding in the office and they should never actually go in there, whereas it's really important to get in and understand that. And corporate governance is another thing that's words that most people don't hear, is running your business like a business and dotting the I's, crossing the T's, planning, all those sorts of things that a good business owner or custodian should actually do.
Yep. And I think like as what we were talking about earlier, the reality is that most businesses have an end date, whether that be through passing on or actually ceasing to a certain extent. And I think any business should go into business assuming that it will end. And I think that's the thing that's a real, I suppose, passion and a real strong point that we're very much so trying to, make sure family groups are sorted out in that sense. Because if you know the divorce whilst you're still sitting on the same side of the table, as opposed to sitting on the opposite sides of the table, it actually, things can work so much better. And I'll call them partnerships, but whatever structures they may be, some of the most successful partnerships, family partnerships that I've seen, is they know the exit and they know they don't have to try and hustle or go to their own, corners, self-motivation, that kind of thing. So the longevity of those businesses or partnerships is so much longer because they don't have to worry about that. It's already sorted out. And I suppose that's one thing, as I said, that we're kind of working through at the moment. You have to know not just the end game kind of thing, but have all those documents sorted out, have your off-farm investments, have your insurances sorted out, like have all these other things, because you can get in and do them. And there's some great things that you can get in and do these days. And therefore you're not worrying about them. You can focus on the business, the strategy. And we all know mitigating risk is one of the biggest things in business these days. And it's only, in my opinion, going to keep getting worse. But those that keep expanding or growing or just even just being are on top of all of those things and don't have to worry about it because it's there. And it's there if you need it, but otherwise it's one less thing to worry about.
Absolutely. And if I think about that one you mentioned before, it's easier to make an agreement. It's easier to make a plan and an agreement to separate a business and go your separate ways when you love each other than when you hate each other. It's much, much easier because when you get to the hate each other phase, that's where all the lawyers make their money, isn't it?
Totally.
And that's where all the wealth gets eroded. So I think it's really important. And if you have a plan, and don't get me wrong, plans always change. Like plans evolve, but if you have a plan to work towards, and again, I think I've said this a couple of times, is the old punch in the face plan. I think Mike Tyson used to talk about it, is if you've got a punch in the face plan, you know what you're going to do if things go wrong. It makes it so much easier to deal with it. On the other side of the coin, if you know where your plan is and say, with honesty, look, at some stage we're going to have to separate the family business because we can't have 3 generations all working together. It's not going to work. So how do we actually do that? You can plan over 20 years. You can put structures in place to minimize tax. You can keep everyone happy. You can mitigate risk. It's such a valuable tool, but it can be quite hard at the beginning to actually nut it out, can't it?
And I think also too, when you're going through all of these things, there is a cost associated with it, but I think it's a lot cheaper paying now or when you're entering into something than on the exit of it. I think you probably, I don't know the figures, but as an estimate, I think I've heard someone say you'll pay 3 times what you should have paid it, from the outset. And I think that's so true. And I think, so if people don't do things because of cost, I probably question why they are going in together and what their business actually looks like in that sense. Because if you're cutting quarters from the beginning or you don't see value in it, and each to their own in their way of thinking, but and maybe because I have that accounting and business and management background, I see value in those things as opposed to the cost of it. But I think to me, it's the setting of the tone, the theme, the strategy, all those, those words that allows you to progress together. And yes, they end up being legal documents, but to me, it's the thought process and the conversations and the thought processes that go through to get to that point in time. I think it's really healthy because I think if you don't make the time then, I think you'll always be chasing your tail on something else along the way.
For sure. And it's just part of the evolution of the discussion, isn't it? Is to be able to say, okay, what do we want? Where are we going to go? And then ongoing have that discussion. So, Sarah, I'd just like to, because we're starting to end of our time, I'm going to give you a time machine. And you're going to be able to go back to, say, when you were 20 years of age, or let's say 22 years of age when you're out of uni. 22. What advice would you give, say, 22-year-old Sarah? And you think about it slightly different in the sense that there's going to be a lot of, let's say, young guys, young girls coming through, families with younger kids. What advice would you give them or yourself which would have helped smooth out your journey?
First of all, and this isn't a serious one, I wish I'd found my husband back then.
Yep.
Some of the bad relationships you go along the way. Choice
of partner, I've said for many years, is I think one of the number one success factor in every aspect of your life. So sorry to interrupt. I think that's absolutely critical.
My dad often says whoever you marry will make or break you, and I think that's totally right. And in hindsight, when he was probably pushing out some of my past exes, I think there was probably a good reason for it. Right. I think the words kindness and respect. I think, I'm not saying I wasn't kind or I wasn't respectful, but I probably didn't realise the journey that I was on when I was at 22. I think I was most fortunate that I didn't have a lot of responsibility back then, other than probably, those apprenticeships and some of those things that we were speaking about. I wouldn't change that element of it, because I think you've got to be young and fun. And I think there's a time and a place for all of that. So I would probably say, not to myself, because I think I made the most of it, is have fun when you're young. Like, there is a reason for it, but know that you have to grow up. And so when, and then that probably leads me to that respect. I think in our younger years, we don't think of our parents or older, when I say older people, they were probably only our age back then, the lessons that they taught me along the way. I probably didn't realize it or appreciate it at that point in time. So therefore, I probably wish I'd taken more time to probably reflect on what was going on, who I was and what I was learning at that point in time. And kindness. I am probably not known for, I call myself a bad acquaintance, but a good friend. So I think I'm very loyal to those that are close to me. I'm not the best acquaintance because I'm actually an introvert at heart. So I don't actually get a lot of energy from a lot of people, so to speak. But the one thing my son has actually taught me is kindness in that sense, because you can't argue with a 1-year-old or what have you. Like, it's
you
kindness.
Can, but it's
pointless. Totally. But what you get back from kindness, I think, is pretty special in that sense. So, and even things like, enjoying your parents, enjoying your grandparents, enjoying your great-grandparents if you're lucky to have them there. Like, all these people have these amazing, amazing stories to tell, and I probably get worried sometimes that they're going to be lost. I was most fortunate to have some pretty amazing, what I would call in hindsight now, mentors of that older generation. And interesting enough, it was all older men that I really probably see as my, if you want to call it your apprenticeship through the mentorship, so to speak. And I probably underestimated what I was learning at that point in time.
And be kind to yourself, I think, is another thing. I look back at me is I'm probably my own worst critic. So I think that kindness is really important.
True. Yeah. Self and inwards facing and outwards facing, really, isn't it, in that sense?
It is. Excellent.
Yep.
Now, where can people find more about you online, Sarah?
Becker & Co has a website. So I was going to say, if you type in Becker & Co Queensland, you have to put the QLD, because there is a cafe down in New South Wales that is Becker & Co. And all those other places like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all that kind of thing. But yeah, our website would be, we spend a fair bit of time as part of our strategy working through our website. And there's a lot of great tales and stories and history and who and what we are on our website.
Well, I always enjoy our conversations. I think the first time we met, Ben. Your sister Fran introduced us, and when I was up in Rockhampton, we grabbed a cup of coffee at the time, and I think we yacked for an hour and a half about all sorts of things, because we come from similar backgrounds, similar values, etc. We are different personalities in some ways, but we got on really well. So this has been great. And look, I'd love to do another podcast at some stage on something a little more technical, because I know your technical expertise is exceptional. So that would be great. And so one last question I like to ask everyone: what's your definition of true wealth?
Family. I think you are judged by, at the end of the day, we're only here for a short period of time. It's what we leave behind. So to me, wealth is my family, my immediate family, my extended family. There's not much more in life that matters as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. That's nice and simple. I love it. And you can see that reflected in the quality of the relationships you have with your siblings, and everyone speaks very highly of each other. And I know all your siblings, as you know.
Yeah, you
do. They do.
Yeah.
They all talk very highly. So no, thank you very much today. You're a powerhouse. I love talking to you. You're a great communicator, and I think younger generations listening to your journey would learn a lot. And I think also to the older generation with kids coming through or grandkids could listen and get a lot out of that. So thanks very much, Sarah.
That's very kind of you to say, Ben.
Well, that was a great podcast. I really enjoyed having a conversation with Sarah. She's a wealth of knowledge and really practical. So, yeah, that was fantastic. Now, if you want to learn more about Sarah online, you can just Google Becker & Co. Rockhampton or Becker & Co. Queensland. Make sure you put in the Queensland, as she said, just in case you get somewhere else. Remember, you can join our private Facebook group, The Financial Blokes Wealth and Wisdom. And thanks for joining me again today, and I'll catch you with a new episode in 2 weeks' time.